Charles III is the newly crowned King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Today's coronation was the first for Britain in 7 decades. Let's go live to our UK correspondent, Olly Barratt. Thank you very much for joining us, Olly. And there were some amazing scenes that we saw earlier, albeit under very gloomy weather. Just give us a sense of the feel on the ground at the moment before we get into the specifics of the coronation and its significance.
Yeah, there's been a very jovial, party-like, celebratory mood in central London. It's been somewhat dampened, as you suggest, by the weather. That certainly has led to the crowds dispersing pretty quickly after the royals went back into Buckingham Palace after that balcony appearance. People going back to their hotels or going back home or getting the train or the bus to wherever they've come from for the day. But those people who've been out on the streets have been, as I say, very celebratory. These royal events are always passed off in a friendly atmosphere because everyone who's here wants to be here, has come here because they want to come and celebrate and take part in everything that's going on and the pomp and the ceremony and the atmosphere around. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who find the day either completely boring and irrelevant, or indeed they find it distasteful. And there were protesters out on the streets today as well, several hundred of them too. But by and large, those people who've been out and about have been in very fine fettle indeed, despite the weather. As I said, crowds dispersing pretty quickly now because the main events for the day today have basically concluded. There's lots more going on through the rest of the weekend, and as I say, the weather certainly has had an impact on the crowds, how long they've been out on the street, the mood, I think. The flypast that took place over Buckingham Palace, indeed right over our heads here, was also scaled back significantly. So the weather has affected things, I think you can't deny that, but by and large the crowds have been very, very large, and there's been a very good atmosphere around those crowds because of their keenness to be here and celebrate this event. Something that the vast majority of people who've been out on the streets here in London have never seen anything like before, because the last coronation, of course, was 7 decades ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Olly, would you say that those huge crowds that we saw perhaps rubbish somewhat the idea that King Charles is not as popular as any other monarch that has ruled in the UK? Or are there still concerns around his popularity and the confidence that he will lead the UK and the Northern Ireland in a way that people can trust?
I think there's something for everyone in all of the data and the polling that we have about Charles and about the monarchy at the moment. You can point to polling which tells you that actually Charles has got significantly more popular in recent weeks and months and indeed years, particularly after the death of his mother and taking over in the role of king. You can also, though, point to polling which shows that he is significantly less popular than his mother was in the later years of her reign. He will certainly hope that once he's been on the throne for a little bit longer, that the public get to know him a bit more in that role and that his popularity grows. The polling also suggests that support for the idea and the institution of the monarchy is lower than it's been for some decades. But at the same time, there is still a fairly strong majority of support in the UK for the monarchy as an institution. So I think Charles will be relatively happy with where he is in terms of the public consciousness and his popularity, but he will also be aware of the fact that these things can change very quickly, and a lot rests on what happens in on a number of issues. There are lots of pressing issues, controversial issues as well for him to deal with. There are controversial issues within his own family as well. So it's very hard to predict exactly where King Charles and his popularity will end up in the years to come. But as I say, if you look at all the data and the polling that we have at the moment, there's something for everyone.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the coronation now, what happened at Westminster Abbey. It wasn't just King Charles that was coronated. His wife, the Queen Consort Camilla, was also coronated. Hers was done without the screen though, Olly, because she is not a reigning sovereign. But tell us a little bit about her role going forward? And does the term consort fall away? Is she Queen Camilla, or does the previous title remain?
Yeah, both titles can still be used. She will still be called Queen Consort by some people, but it is clear that the palace has decided that this really is the moment that they think she should become known as Queen Camilla. That crown being placed on her head in that ceremony in Westminster Abbey, clearly a significant moment in that regard. On the front of the Order of Service in Westminster Abbey, she is described as Queen Camilla. I think that is how we are going to hear her described by the palace and the royal household going forward. And so there is a transition moment that's taking place at the moment. That doesn't mean that Queen Consort is now a wrong term to be used about Camilla, but as I say, from a royal household perspective, from Charles's perspective, it's pretty clear that Queen Camilla is how they will now describe her from here on in. In terms of that service in the Abbey, it was pared back a bit compared to Queen Elizabeth's coronation in 1953. It was shorter than that. There were various elements to it that were new as well. We had gospel music for the first time in one of these types of coronation services. We also had multi-faith representation. Charles clearly wanted to make a point of including that in the service. We had Priti Yende singing at the beginning of the service. She has been remarked upon as getting things off to a very good start indeed by onlookers here in the UK. So there was a lot in that service related to Charles and Camilla that was new, but also that reflected the old ancient traditions. That coronation chair that's been in use for 700 years or so, the Abbey itself, which has been England's coronation church since 1066.
And let's talk about the variety of events that took place within the Abbey. Does that indicate that Charles is perhaps not as conservative as many would think, and he's very cognizant of a new diverse world that exists and the different needs of different people, and hopefully he'll be able to meet those different needs as he reigns?
It's a really interesting balance, because actually some years ago there was a lot of speculation that Charles himself, perhaps when he became monarch, wanted to become the defender of all faiths rather than the head of the Anglican Church and the defender of the Protestant faith in the UK and beyond. But that wasn't what we saw in this service. It was very much an Anglican service with representation from other faiths. So I think Charles has decided over the years that once we got to this point, that was going to be how he would handle this. We would see those other faith leaders playing an important role. They had that moment right at the end of the service with Charles and those multi-faith leaders. They had a moment at the end of the service before Charles left to make the procession back to Buckingham Palace. So it's something that Charles is clearly very conscious of. The UK is a very diverse country indeed, all sorts of faiths practiced in this country, and Charles is clearly very aware that he can't just be a monarch for Protestant Christians. We saw a Catholic bishop taking part in this ceremony for the first time. That's happened in this country for centuries. And so there is a recognition that the UK is changing, and therefore that the royal family has to try and move with it. That was often one of the areas of praise that Queen Elizabeth received, that idea that she was always able to somehow move with a modernising Britain and seem completely comfortable with it. And I think that's something that Charles feels he wants to take on from his mother. And that takes us back to some of the polling and the data we were talking about earlier. When it comes to Charles and his popularity, a lot of that polling does say that he's significantly less popular with younger Britons than he is with older Britons. And so I think this service today, but also the way he's going to reign, the way he's going to use and work with William and Kate and some of the younger royals, will be crucial in all of that, as he tries to make sure that he is a monarch that represents as much as possible of the UK rather than just a certain element of it.
Thank you very much for that update. Correspondent Olly Barratt will let you get out of the cold and into some warmth, offering us an update on today's coronation proceedings and really the reign that we could look forward to from King Charles III. Now, off to a powerful start for King Charles III as he looked of King Charles and III and the King